Welcome to the HFY Codex Tale. If you like our videos, keep supporting and subscribe to our channel. Delivery day, the shackled arrival. The sky over Earth was dark, heavy with clouds. A small black ship landed at the edge of Outpost 17, a secret base hidden deep in the northern mountains. No one was allowed near. No cameras, no records, only silence. Inside the ship, chained and cold, sat a tall alien woman. Her name was Riley's. She was from the planet Vetrax 4, a race known for their beauty and their deadly reputation. To humans, she was not a guest. She was a prisoner. Riley's had heard the stories. Humans didn't forgive. Humans didn't show mercy. And humans didn't care what you felt, only what you were worth. So when the ship's door opened and guards shouted at her to stand, she did not resist. She had learned long ago, resistance only made the pain worse. They put a black collar around her neck. It beeped softly, a controlled device. And then they walked her down the long steel hallway, her feet bare, her wrists tight in metal cuffs. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She only thought one thing. Pain is coming. At the far end of the hallway, a door opened. A man stood waiting. Human, tall, wearing dark gray uniform, not smiling, not frowning. Just watching her. "Is that the new one?" he asked the guards. "Yes, sir," one replied. "Straight from Vetrax, high risk." "She dangerous?" "She's a fighter class, killed 3 during her capture." The man nodded. "Leave us." The guards looked surprised. "Sir, protocol says." "I said leave us." The door shut, silence. Riley stayed still, breathing slow. The man didn't move closer. He didn't shout, he didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he pulled a chair across the room and sat down. "I'm Daniel," he said. She said nothing. He looked at the metal cuffs on her wrists. Uncomfortable. Still no answer. He stood slowly and walked to a small panel, pressed a button. Her cuffs clicked and opened. She stared. Was this a trick? He stepped back. "I don't believe in chains," he said. "Why?" she asked, finally speaking. Her voice was low, deep, almost a growl. "Because pain doesn't change people, it only hides them." She looked at him, confused. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said, "not yet." He walked to a table and placed down a plate. Food, real food, not dried rations. "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." She didn't move. "You think kindness is a trick," he said softly. "Because it always is," she replied. The room fell silent again. Daniel sat across from her. Not close, just near enough for her to see his eyes. Not cold, not cruel, just tired. He finally spoke again. "I read your file, they called you a killer." "I am," she said. "But they didn't say why." She looked away. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." She stared at the food. Her body was weak, but her mind was sharper than ever. This human was different, but different did not mean safe. Still, after a long moment, she reached for the plate. A soft sound escaped her throat. Not pain. Relief. The food was warm. Real. She took a slow bite. Daniel said nothing, he just watched. And when she finished, he walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "You'll stay in this room for now. No chains, no cuffs, just space." "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice steady. "Because everyone expects me to hurt you. I'd rather surprise them." Then he left. Riley sat in silence. The collar still hummed quietly. Her hands shook. Not from fear. From confusion. No one had ever treated her this way. No one had ever not wanted something. She sat on the floor, her back to the wall, the empty plate beside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what to feel. But deep in her chest, something moved. Not hate. Not anger. Something softer. And it scared her more than any weapon ever had. The human who did hurt her. The lights in her cell faded from orange to blue. It was morning again. But Riley's hadn't slept. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her back against the wall, staring at the corner like it might bite her. No chains. No guards. No pain. Yet the silence was heavier than iron. Then the door opened. She didn't flinch, but her muscles tensed. Daniel stepped in, holding a folded blanket and a steaming cup. "Morning." She said nothing. He placed the blanket on the bed, then the cup on the small table. "It's broth, easier than solid food. Thought you might need it." Still silence. He glanced at the floor, then back at her. "Look, I'm not here to win you over. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to talk." "Then why come?" she asked suddenly. He shrugged. "Because you're not just a file, you're a person." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what your people said when they dragged me from my ship." "And I didn't say it either." She stared at him, waiting. No lies. No threats. Just stillness. "You speak soft," she said. "Because you've heard enough shouting," he replied. He turned to leave again. "Wait," she said. He paused. "The food yesterday. It didn't taste like poison." "That's the point," he smirked. She stared at him, confused again. Was this humor? Was he playing with her? "You're strange." "You're not the first to say that," he said, walking out. When the door shut, Riley's looked at the broth. Steam curled softly in the air. She picked up the cup and sniffed it, smelled like herbs and something warm. She sipped. Her eyes fluttered. It tasted safe. That night she was given clothes. Soft, clean, no metal, no tracking tags. She held them tightly, unsure why she felt like crying. She hadn't worn anything soft in years. Daniel returned again the next morning. This time he brought 2 chairs. "Let's sit," he said. "No questions, no pressure, just company." She hesitated, then slowly moved from the floor to the chair. Her legs trembled from how long she'd been still. But she didn't fall, and he didn't help. He let her find balance on her own. That meant something. "Do you believe what they say about me?" she asked after some time. "I believe what I see," he said. "And what do you see?" He looked straight at her. Someone who's still breathing, even when she expected not to be. She looked away. "I don't know how to be like this." "That's fine," he said. "No one taught you, that's not your fault." Riley's clenched her hands. Her claws twitched just slightly. "Are you trying to break me?" "No," he said gently. "I'm trying to give you back what they took." "What's that?" "Yourself." She stood quickly. "Stop saying things that feel true. I don't want them to feel true." "I know," Daniel said. "But they still are." She backed away to the far corner. Her breathing heavy, eyes wet. But still no chains. No shock. No commands. Just a man who didn't try to control her. Only listen. After he left, she looked at the reflection of herself in the wall plate. She didn't look like a warrior. Not right now. She looked like a woman trying to remember what it meant to feel. Anything but fear. And deep inside her chest, something whispered. He hasn't touched you. But somehow, he's already reaching parts no one ever dared go. The touch that didn't burn. The air was colder today. A storm brewed outside the base, icy wind crashing against steel walls. Inside her cell, Riley sat near the heating vent, wrapped in the soft gray blanket Daniel had brought her days ago. She hadn't asked for it, but she hadn't let go of it either. The door hissed open. She looked up. Daniel. Again. This time with something small in his hand. "You're limping," he said. "No, I'm not," she replied quickly. He raised an eyebrow. "I've been watching you walk for 4 days. You weren't limping before." He stepped closer and held up a small healing patch. She stiffened. "Don't touch me." "I won't," he said. "You do it." He placed the patch on the table and stepped back. Riley's looked at it, then at him. Slowly, she walked over, picked it up, and peeled back her boot. Her ankle was swollen, more than she thought. She winced. Daniel didn't move. He didn't stare. He just waited. She pressed the patch against her skin. A soft pulse ran through her foot. She gasped, not in pain, but in relief. "It works," she muttered. "That's what it's for," he said with a slight smile. She put her boot back on, stood, and stumbled. Reflex took over. Daniel reached out, and his hand grabbed her wrist. Time froze. Her breath caught. Her skin should have reacted. Her race was bred to attack through touch. Any sudden contact usually triggered a defense pulse, like venom. But this time, nothing happened. No burning. No static. No strike. Only warmth. Soft. Gentle. Real. Daniel pulled back immediately. "Sorry," he said. "I wasn't thinking." But Riley stood still, staring at her wrist. "You touched me." He waited. She looked up, wide-eyed. "And I didn't hurt you." Daniel's voice was calm. "Maybe that means you're healing." "No," she said. "It means you're different." She sat down again, shaking slightly. "Not from pain. From discovery." Every other being who touched me without warning screamed. "I didn't," he said. "Why not?" He thought for a moment. "Because I didn't touch you in fear." She looked at him in silence, and something deep inside her chest stirred. A feeling she didn't recognize. It wasn't duty, or threat, or survival. It was comfort. Later that night, she looked at her wrist again. It still glowed faintly where he had touched her. Not from pain, from something warm. She pressed her palm to her chest. Her heartbeat was faster than normal. For a moment, she smiled. Just a little, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Because this was dangerous. Not to her body, but to everything she believed about humans. About herself. About what she thought she was, a weapon, a prisoner. And now, maybe, something more. The story she had never heard. The storm outside hadn't stopped. Winds howled across the base, metal walls creaked, but inside her cell everything was still. Riley sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her open hand. She had felt it again today. Warmth. Not fire, not anger. But something human. And it came from him. She didn't hear the door open. Daniel stepped in, holding 2 cups of hot tea. He handed her one wordlessly. She took it. This time she didn't flinch. They sat, no words, just steam rising in silence. After a long moment he spoke. "You want to know why I treat you like this?" She didn't answer, but her eyes said yes. Daniel looked down at the tea in his hands. "I was a prisoner too, years ago, before the peace talks." Her eyes widened slightly. "Human prisoner." He nodded. "Captured during the war, held for 6 months. No food unless I obeyed, shocked for asking questions, used as a test subject." Riley's hand tightened around the cup. "Who did it?" "Not your people," he said quickly. "Another faction, but after that I promised myself something." "What?" He looked at her. "If I ever found someone else locked in chains, someone breathing, suffering, scared, I wouldn't treat them like I was treated." Riley stared at him, stunned. No human had ever said something like that to her. No one had ever looked at her and seen anything but a threat. "And now I sit in front of you," she whispered, "as proof that your people still see me as a danger." "Not me," Daniel replied. "Why not?" "Because I see your silence. I see the way you hold your breath before you speak. I see a fighter who never chose to be born into a war." Something broke inside her then. Not loudly. Not violently. Just quietly. Like ice melting. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. She quickly wiped it away, angry at herself. "I don't cry," she said. "You just did," he said softly. "And that's okay." She stood, backing away. Her body was trembling. "You're getting inside me." Daniel stood too, but he didn't move closer. "No, I'm just seeing what's already there." "Stop," she said, her voice shaking. "You make me feel things I'm not supposed to feel." "Like what?" "Like I'm not broken." He took one step closer. "You're not." Another tear. "Like I can be touched." "You can." "Like I deserve peace." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "You do." She stared at him like he'd just rewritten the laws of her world. Because no one had ever said that. Not even her own people. That night after he left, she curled under the blanket. She didn't cry again. She just breathed slow, steady, and for the first time. Without fear. The night she didn't want to run. Midnight. The base was asleep, the hall silent, lights dimmed. But Riley's was wide awake. Her body, once always tense, now lay still. Her mind, once locked in survival, was filled with something unfamiliar. Peace. Then came the soft chime. The security gate. It had opened. Her eyes snapped to the cell door. She stood quickly. It wasn't a mistake. The door was unlocked. The collar silent, no cameras watching. A quiet voice echoed from the hallway panel. "You are cleared for transfer. Step out if you wish. No guards will stop you." She walked forward, slow, cautious. She reached the doorway. Outside, freedom. Beyond that, the landing zone. She could vanish into the night. No more chains, no more questions. No more Daniel. She took one step into the hallway. Then stopped. The cold hit her skin. But it wasn't the chill that made her hesitate. It was something inside. A warmth, a pull. She turned her head. Down the hall was Daniel's room. Lights off, door closed. He didn't know. He trusted her. She should run. It was the smart move, the safe one. But she turned and walked. Not away. Toward him. Her bare feet made no sound on the metal floor. She reached his door and paused. Her chest tightened. Then softly she knocked. No answer. Again. Then the door opened. Daniel stood there half asleep, eyes confused. "Riley's." She looked up at him. Her voice cracked. "I don't want to run." He blinked. "You're free to go. No one would have stopped you." "I know," she whispered. "Then why are you here?" Her voice shook. "Because when I thought about running, I didn't feel alive. But when I thought about staying..." She touched her own chest. "I felt this." He stepped aside. She entered. He didn't ask questions. Didn't touch her. Just let her sit beside him. She wrapped the blanket tighter and closed her eyes. "I don't know what's happening to me," she admitted. "You're healing," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm changing." They sat in silence. And for the first time since she arrived on Earth, she fell asleep. Not in a cage. Not in fear. But beside a man who never asked for her submission. Only her trust. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, the room was still. Warm. Safe. Real. The ones who wanted her back. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel stood at the base control room, staring at a blinking alert on the main screen. Unregistered ship approaching. Fast. Heavy. Armed. He tapped the panel. It responded with only 2 words. VATRAX Elite. His heart sank. Down in her room, Riley's was already awake. She sat with the blanket wrapped around her, watching the sky change colors through the small window. She felt it in her bones. They were coming. Daniel burst into the room. "Riley's, we have a problem." She nodded. "It's them." They sent a warship. No transmission, no greeting, just one message. Return the Vetraxi female or face consequence. Riley's looked down. They think I'm theirs. Are you? He asked gently. She met his eyes. Not anymore. An alarm rang across the base. Sirens. Lockdown protocols. Troopers rushed to positions, unsure what was coming. Daniel took Riley's by the hand. She didn't pull away. We have to move, they'll try to take you. They won't just take me, she said. They'll kill you for touching me, for talking to me like I matter. Let them try, Daniel whispered. He led her down a hidden corridor, an old emergency tunnel only command staff knew. There's an escape pod. I can launch you out of the system. No, she said sharply. He stopped. Riley's. I'm not leaving you. If they want to drag me back, they'll have to burn through both of us. They reached the hangar. Outside, the enemy ship descended. Black spiked, Vetrax's royal crest burning red on the hull. A voice thundered through the air, amplified across the base. The female is royal property. Release her now or be erased. Daniel stood firm. She's not property, she's a person. She was bred for obedience. Then she's rewriting her code. From behind, Riley stepped forward. Her voice calm but cold. I am not your weapon. You belong to the bloodline. Then I reject it. The voice replied. Then you will die with him. The hangar lights went red. Missile locks engaged. Target Daniel and Riley's. Run, Daniel said. I said I'm not leaving. You'll die. Then let me die free. Suddenly, Riley's raised her hand. Energy surged from her chest. A pulse wild, powerful, and not from pain, but from choice. The Vetraxi ship reeled. Its systems shorted. The lock failed. Riley's collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Daniel caught her. What was that? A new part of me, she whispered. The part you helped wake up. The enemy ship fled. Silent, broken. It didn't expect her to fight back. It didn't expect her to be strong without chains. Back in the control room, commanders watched in shock. One whispered. She defended him. Another added. He changed her. Daniel held her close. Her body weak, her heart racing. But she smiled. Not because she won, but because she chose to. The pleasure of being chosen. 3 days passed. No more alarms. No more warnings. No more threats from the stars. Just silence. And in that silence, something beautiful had started to grow. Riley's walked through the open halls of the base now. No collar, no cuffs. Her posture was different. Her eyes softer. Her steps lighter. She was still the same warrior. But now she walked like someone who chose her own steps. Daniel sat in the small garden space behind the base. Earth's sun warmed his face. He heard the quiet sound of footsteps. He didn't turn. He knew it was her. Riley sat beside him, folding her legs under herself. Do you still think I'll leave one day? She asked. Daniel didn't look at her. I think you're free to. And if I stay, then it means everything. She turned to him. There was no fear in her eyes now. Only want. Not hunger. Not power. Just want. The others, she said, they told me humans were cruel, that they only touched to control, that pleasure was a trick, that kindness was weakness. And what do you believe now? He asked. She leaned in close, her voice a whisper. That they were wrong. She placed his hand against her cheek. No burns. No pain. Just warmth. I thought pleasure was something stolen, she said. But with you, it's something given. He touched her wrist gently. It pulsed with golden light. It's not the touch that changed me, she said. It was the way you never forced it. She rested her head on his shoulder. You didn't take me. You waited for me to choose. He smiled softly. And now, she pulled his hand to her heart. Now I choose you. That night they didn't sleep in fear. They didn't whisper in darkness. They didn't hide their connection. They shared a quiet bed, skin to skin, breath to breath. No command, no duty, no fear. Only consent. Only comfort. Only freedom. In the morning, she whispered, I never thought I'd say this. Daniel opened his eyes, sleep still in them. What? She smiled. I don't want to go back to my old life. Then don't. I want this one with you. Somewhere in the stars, her people still hunted. Somewhere in secret files, she was still listed as dangerous. But in this small corner of the galaxy, she was no one's weapon, no one's prisoner, no one's project. She was simply his. And even more than that, he was hers. The end Milky Way.